Yo, what's up? It's Someone That's No One, and welcome back to another collection of trip reports. Today we got a classic we covered a ton on this channel, that being the popular dissociative over-the-counter substance of DXM. DXM for me has given me some of my most powerful trips, and the reports we've had on this channel do match out to that. The way it acts on the brain is pretty bizarre itself, leading to some of the most unique trips you might hear. So I had to gather some bangers and show them here. But I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. The Infinite Hallways of the Mind. Last night, I had my first encounter with DXM. Actually, it was my first encounter with any drug besides marijuana and alcohol. I don't have much framework to base my experience on because of this, and so I don't really know exactly how to describe what happened. I will try my best. To begin, my friend Jay and I got our hands on a 500 milligram gel cap of pure DXM for each of us. We were driving home from a city about 50 minutes away from Jay's house, where we were to spend our night. And we took the pills about 20 minutes away from home to shorten our idle time once we arrived. We were also still feeling pretty good from some marijuana we had smoked earlier in the evening, though that high ended about the time we pulled into his driveway. We got to his house at about 2:30 a.m. or so. I had to urinate badly, and Jay was taking his sweet time unlocking and opening the door, so I went around the side of his house to relieve myself in some bushes. I heard his dog in the backyard barking at me, and I heard in the barking a man's voice saying, "Get away from there," very forcefully. I thought Jay's father was at the kennel and saw me violating his yard, and I became embarrassed and finished my business promptly. However, there was not a living thing near the kennel except the dog, and no neighbors to speak of. I was a bit confused by this, but didn't think too much about it after I told Jay about it, who had no explanation. Despite hearing reports of DXM-related nausea, Jay promptly fixed us 2 egg and cheese Hot Pockets, which he put on a single plate. We were planning to watch the film Dazed and Confused, so I went into his room to get it off his DVD shelf. Before I made it to his bedroom, he called me into the bathroom, where he was busy inspecting his eyes. He showed them to me, and I was amazed at how dilated his pupils were. His bright green eyes were now almost entirely black. He said this was a good sign, and I just shrugged, having to take his word for it. Jay started to act a bit strangely, staring at me, breathing deeply, and taking on a vacant/distant look. I, however, felt nothing at this point and went into his room to get the movie. As I turned on his light, though, I had my first inkling of what was to come, as hard to describe as it may have been and continues to be. I turned on the light in his room, and the bulb flickered for a few seconds before staying on. In those few moments of hesitant flickering, however, I nearly reeled, for my entire vision seemed to be an old, scratched film. The blinking light was an old-fashioned reel projector, and the sum of the moment became unreal instantly. My mind even supplied scratches on the film, and things appeared in black and white. The vision lasted only the few short moments it took for the light to decide to stay on, but it had a profound and unnerving effect on me, filling me with a very, very short, but very deep sense of terror. A vague yet terrible fear of the unreality it seemed I was going to be subjected to. As it passed, though, so did the feeling of inebriation and the feeling of fear. I felt that it had been completely in my own imagination, not fueled by any drug, and I convinced myself I was stone sober, which, in retrospect, I very clearly was not. I told Jay of this experience as I looked for the movie, which I was unable to locate. He looked too, not commenting on my momentary hallucination, and couldn't find the movie either. So we resigned ourselves to not watching any movie and made our way downstairs with the food. In the basement, Jay stretched out on the love seat, and I sat down next to him on the floor, eating my Hot Pocket. We had dimmed the lights to a very low level. We had been told partial light was best for DXM. And Jay, who has done many drugs but never DXM, said he was starting to really feel it and laid down, breathing heavy. He told me he had a videotape of trippy visuals that he called his Dennis Leary movie in his bedroom, and he gave me specific instructions to find it. He was on crutches, having just had extensive knee surgery, and I myself was in no mood or condition to journey upstairs. I followed his instructions to the letter, entering his room and looking through his small entertainment center. I found nothing but clothing in the cupboard where he had told me he had housed the video. I started to feel as if I were very drunk on alcohol and tore the clothing out of the cupboard without reservation, throwing it all around his room, quickly losing most of my control over my motor skills, but finding no video. I returned empty-handed to the basement, feeling as if I were sobering up on my way down the stairs, to find Jay in an almost trance-like state. His eyes were dilated beyond belief, and I just ate the remaining Hot Pocket, Jay deciding he wasn't very hungry after all. The drunken feeling had mostly passed, leaving me feeling as if I were only mildly inebriated. He kept saying, "Oh God, this is going to be big," and I told him I didn't feel anything except a slight feeling of lightheadedness, such as I feel after a moderate amount of alcohol, and felt gypped. He said not to worry about it, that I would feel something soon enough. He was quiet for a while. I was starting to think it would never kick in, that I was just going to feel slightly drunk all night. So I stood up to get on the couch, next to the love seat, perpendicular to it in fact, when I realized that, yes indeed, I was feeling something new. As the bottom of the world seemed to drop out from under me, the room melted for a moment as my vision struggled to keep up with my eyes. Standing up felt like it took forever. It seemed I was swimming out of myself and my body had to catch up to where I was. I wasn't prepared for this and quickly sat down on the couch, disoriented, confused, and breathing heavy. I told Jay that I wasn't sure that I was entirely sober, an understatement to say the least, and he just nodded, his face locked in a grim expression I had seen on him once before in the middle of an acid trip. He told me he was really burning up, and I saw that his face was awfully red. With his light blonde eyebrows, I swore up and down to him that he was starting to look like an Oompa Loompa, which confused him and amused me to no end. He wouldn't stop talking about how hot he felt and that he was on fire, and him talking about his high temperature made me notice my own feeling of being very warm. I told him as coherent a sentence as I could muster, which, in retrospect, wasn't all that coherent, that perhaps the Vicodin he was on for his knee was attributing to his high body temperature, which he seemed to acknowledge and accept. He stopped worrying about burning up, and so I was able to ignore my own high temperature as well. We sat there a while, just looking at each other, but not entirely recognizing each other. This is a hard concept to wrap my head around, even now, for while I knew this was Jay, and I knew who Jay was, this person in front of me, at the same time, wasn't Jay, and yet I knew he wasn't a threat and acknowledged it must be Jay after all. He looked as if he were very far away from me, as though I were viewing him from across the room, and at the same time, he looked as though he were much too close to me. Jay asked me to return to the floor next to the love seat, because I was in fact too far away from him, and he didn't want to feel abandoned. I complied, but didn't like the floor for some reason. I wasn't entirely sure and went back to the couch, but without comment or dissent from Jay. The one lamp we had turned on in the living room had a dimmer on it, and we had, as stated earlier, put the lamp on a dim level. After returning to the couch, I dimmed the lamp even more, because it seemed to me it would be a good idea to do so, even though I had no logical reason at the time to think this, other than assuring myself that darkness would feel pleasant at that point in time. After a moment, the light seemed to get brighter by a number of levels on its own accord, and I thought it was perhaps entirely an effect of the drug on my vision or perception. But Jay suddenly looked to the lamp, and I said, "So you saw it too," at which he nodded. Almost immediately, The lamp went back to the extremely dim level I had just adjusted it to, and Jay and I looked at each other, a bit confused and shocked. The lamp settled down and stopped playing with itself. I was content for the moment and sat in the dark, looking at things and not knowing exactly where I was, as if everything in this room that had been familiar to me since childhood, Jay being an old friend, was suddenly new and unknown. I lost all sense of time. I had no benchmarks to gauge time by, and I couldn't read the digital clock on the VCR across the room because when I tried to look at it, my vision became blurry or quaked too much to allow comprehension. What felt like hours must have been mere minutes. In fact, at certain points, I was certain that whole years and even epochs were passing by us. At times, I thought everything was moving in slow motion. At other times, I felt as if everything were rushing by me in a blur, while my own body was trapped in an envelope of unmoving time. I'm not exactly a foreigner to altered senses of time. I am, even sober, not good at judging intervals of time. And even when inebriated with alcohol, I lose much of what little time sense I have. And yet the complete and utter foreign sense of time in this state was completely unexpected. I think that this complete perversion of the time sense was perhaps the most interesting aspect of the drug. There was no noise in the house. We had neglected to put on any music. If I ever do DXM again, I will definitely put a CD in the stereo. And yet I recall there being no silence at all. I can remember very few certain sounds, and yet I remember plenty of sounds ringing through my ears. I heard a voice at one point hissing something above my head, sort of a sa, sa sound, which I took to be an alien language. Oddly enough, I didn't find it unusual to be hearing alien languages streaming to me from vacant space, though I think I tried to mimic the sound for Jay unconvincingly. Soon I started getting very nervous. I was convinced I would never get out of this frame of mind, and I was worried about how I was going to function in life with my head all jumbled up as it was. I started to get very scared, to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat. I didn't want to be like this, especially not for the rest of my life. I wasn't prepared for this journey and realized I was in way over my head, and I started to despair. I then noticed that this was illogical thinking. I said to myself, if you keep thinking like this, you're going to ruin your experience with all this negativity. So I made myself stop thinking about the end of the experience and just enjoy the now of it, which worked surprisingly well, as I almost immediately felt near euphorically happy. Then I noticed that the whole room was rocking, as if we were below decks on a large boat in the ocean. The fact that Jay's father is an avid deep-sea fisherman and as a consequence decorated the basement in nautical motifs surely did nothing to defeat this feeling, perhaps even generated it, from the clock shaped like nautical steering wheels to a large mounted swordfish on the wall. I told Jade that we were on a large boat, conveying almost all of my experiences throughout the night to him, or that it felt that way, but he wasn't saying much by this point, just lying with his eyes closed. I hadn't closed my eyes by this point. I realized now that he was probably enjoying the cinema of his mind, and in fact did not close my eyes until much later into the night, and a few times thought, incorrectly, that he had fallen asleep. The boat went on rocking for a while, and suddenly I told Jay that I was going to go vomit, and he said he thought that would be a good idea for him as well. It's an odd thing, knowing that you're going to be sick in a little while, and yet not feeling sick at the moment. And yet I knew that I should vomit, that I would benefit from vomiting, so I made plans to do so in the near future. With this in mind, I stood up and started walking towards the bathroom, noticing the peculiar feeling of my body's movement. I felt as if gravity were increased for me, or that I was under deep water pressure. At the same time, the movement was intensely pleasurable, and I found I enjoyed just swinging my arms and dancing a bit. I cannot even describe how this felt accurately. It was as if my body would move, and then my spirit would catch up to the point in the physical realm to which my body had moved. Walking to the bathroom was a very difficult maneuver, mainly because my perception of distance was completely and utterly unreliable by this point. Objects a mere foot away from me might seem to be a world away, and objects further away seemed to be uncomfortably close. I would take one step and seem to move a mile, and then take another step and seem to go nowhere, coupled with the fact that I had moments where what I saw through my eyes seemed, to me, to be a movie on a distant screen. I found that walking to a destination seemed at the time to be a wholly remarkable feat of will. Eventually, I made it to my rather unremarkable destination, the tiny basement bathroom, and having finished my nasty spot of business, and Jay having finished his, we sat in silence in the bright lights of the vanity, looking at the floor and remarking in various sarcastic tones, "Well, that was pleasant." I told him I thought I was all better, that everything was over, and indeed, for a few moments I thought that everything was over, that I was sober. And then I opened the door to the hallway, and it was pitch black. I looked down the hallway, saw the couch I wanted to sit on, and saw an expanding distance between me and that couch. As I stood there, my head hanging out of the bathroom into the hallway, I watched the living room speed steadily away from me, the hallway stretching and stretching until it looked nearly infinite. At the same time, it seemed as if the hallway took on a sharp downward angle, so that I was looking down a nearly infinite pit, and that the living room was something to fall in and tumble through a void. "Fuck," I told Jay. "I guess I was wrong about that sober thing." I don't remember the walk back to the couch, or the next bit after I made it to the couch, but after a short while I went and threw up again, and so did Jay. Again, we were in the bathroom, Jay sitting on the sink, and me sitting on the floor near the toilet, with it being much too bright in the room. My sensitivity to light was much like how one might experience being jarred from a deep sleep in the pre-dawn hours by someone turning on their bedroom light, but neither one of us willing to turn off the light for some unspoken and unknown reason. After a few moments, though we both felt like we had been in there for days, weeks, or years, I once again opened the door to the hallway. I once again don't remember any of the walk back to the couch, but once there, Jay asked, as if I felt we had just been at s'mores, and remarked that he was amazed we made it so far. I felt the same way, that we had covered immeasurable distances and wrestled with impossible difficulties to get to the living room. I agreed that we had just been at s'mores, going through uncharted territory and barely escaping. It seemed that in the short time it must have taken us to get to the bathroom to the couches, being not more than 20 feet apart, we had shared a very real and distinct hallucinatory experience that neither one of us could recall except in fragmented, unclear bits of dim memory. I got it in my head, however, that we had just trekked across Mount Everest and started feeling very, very cold, thinking I must have gotten frostbite on the mountain because I was wearing only slacks and an undershirt. Jay got me a blanket, and once I had it over me, I felt very, very hot. I was better than cold though, so I just sat there happily, smiling at everything, thinking about how nice it was to be alive and how wonderful it was to be on this alien planet, as I was now convinced I was no longer on Earth. My mood was incredibly positive. Everything seemed fine, even though at the same time I was in what I took to be a completely foreign environment. The unknown held no threat for me. It was just a reason to be happy because everything was fine. I was grinning like an idiot. Jay decided it was a good time to turn on the television, though I wasn't sure of that, my sensitivity to light being what it was. I noticed, too, that on the way back from our second trip to the bathroom, that one of us must have turned on the overhead light in the living room, a very bright and harsh light to begin with, an even more harsh light under the circumstances. I remarked to Jay that it needed to be turned off now, and it was turned off, though I don't recall either one of us getting up to operate the switch. Jay got up to get the remote for the television. I started thinking that I was in the acid trip scene from the film SLC Punk, and I was watching the two characters in the scene talk. and I was nodding at what they were saying, even though I wasn't paying attention to them. Then I realized my eyes were closed, so I opened them and the television was on. I couldn't keep my eyes on the television. They just simply refused to look at it and slid downwards so that I was looking at the bottom of the entertainment center that housed the television. I told Jay I couldn't watch TV, that it hurt my eyes, and that I was seeing double anyways. And indeed, I was seeing double of everything. And so I just watched Jay for a while, both of him, staring at the television, which confused me because the television hurt me. Why not him? I decided to leave Jay to his television stupor and turned to watch the column in the room. His living room is, as stated, in the basement, and in the center of the room is a pole used to support, I presume, the upper level of the house. It is wrapped in a blue and white striped nylon rope, and the effect is not unlike a red and white barber's pole. I had a fun time looking at it because the swirling pattern seemed to be revolving and melting at the same time, and I just watched it, not telling Jay about it because it felt as if it was a private show for me. After a while, the melting pole seemed too much to handle. I took to just closing my eyes and opening them, each time feeling as if I was waking up from a long-age sleep, never actually sleeping though. I felt as if I was always in that moment of haze upon waking up in the middle of a dream, that smoky, muddy feeling of being half awake. I was very entertained by this and was overjoyed by it for a while. Jay was flipping through the channels, but none of the data flowing from the television was registering with me, though I do remember at one point seeing an actor from SLC Punk in a movie on the TV, which amazed me because just moments before I had been imagining I was in SLC Punk. What a coincidence, I thought, but I still had a hard time looking at the television, so I gave up trying and instead spent a considerable amount of time trying to read the VCR's clock, failing horribly. I kept making Jay read the time to me because his vision wasn't as affected as mine was. I spent the time just stretched out on the love seat, and for a while I felt and saw everything in the room become compressed into a one-dimensional plane, a very convincing and pleasurably unique yet hard to relate hallucination that ended much too quickly. Around 5 a.m. or so, by Jay's account, my time sense was still completely out of whack, and I was wondering how it was possible it was even the same day as, let alone mere hours after, the ingestion of the pill. Jay said it was probably time to go to bed, and I grabbed a sleeping bag and we headed up to his room. I made myself a place to sleep on his floor, and he got up to his bed and fell asleep right away. Not me, though, for now. In his almost entirely dark room, I was seeing what appeared to be geometric patterns composed of pure energy flowing in front of my eyes, forming what looked like electronic circuits and spilling out what I took to be alien alphabets that I could not read but loved for its aesthetic properties all the same. I noticed in retrospect that much of my experiences that night I attributed at the time to belonging to an alien, extraterrestrial source, from the alien planet I thought we were on, to the alien voice I heard, to the alien alphabets I saw in my visuals in the dark. I watched these for what seemed to be quite a while, sometimes with my eyes open, and sometimes with my eyes shut, and sometimes my eyes blinking rapidly or slowly. Then I noticed his window. There was a bit of moonlight streaming in through it, but the curtains were drawn, and so it was just an ethereal, white square floating in the void. I moved my head around for a good while, watching this white square leave trails of light throughout his room. And then I fell quickly into a deep sleep, around what I estimated at the time was around 5:45 a.m. to 6 a.m., but could have been 5:01 for all I really know. I woke up at 2:30, feeling parched and foggy in the head, but amazingly happy. I headed home as Jay was expecting company. Upon writing down an initial report of my experiences 2 hours later, I still felt splendid. Everything seemed a bit unreal for me for the remainder of the day. My head felt a bit fuzzy on the inside, as if I were mildly yet pleasantly hung over. I fell asleep at 8:30 p.m., slept for a few hours, and awoke feeling completely sober, but still very, very happy and refreshed. Friends of mine who I talked to after this kept asking if I was high. Such was my giddiness. No, I assured them, I had just had an exciting weekend. And so my first psychedelic experience was a pleasant and exciting surprise. Despite some initial fear at a total alien state of mind and some difficulty coming to terms with the strange inebriation I found myself thrown into, the trip as a whole was interesting, if confusing. I have since been told that 500 milligrams is a doozy of a first time dose, but I feel it was a fine amount. But on the other hand, I had read up on DXM, had talked to people about it, and expected to be overwhelmed, and expected to have to remind myself that I was on a trip so as to avoid fear. DXM 1800 milligrams, first time trip. Well, here is my experience of my first DXM trip. I try to remember everything as best as I can, but some parts were very hazy, understandably, and hard to convey. I'll give a little information about who I am and all that jazz. I'm a 28-year-old guy from a middle of nowhere town with nothing to do in Saskatchewan, Canada. I suffer from major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. I've been on and off of drugs for about 15 years and am quite experienced with a variety of substances. When it comes to drugs, I don't have many inhibitions about taking large doses or doing really whatever I can get my hands on. I've done a lot of drugs, but I'm a total newbie when it comes to dissociate substances. Anyway, here's the tale of the trip as best as I can remember. DXM 1800 milligrams, split into 4 doses, taken within a period of 2 hours. 2 o'clock. After waiting weeks for my Robocough to come in the mail, I opened my mailbox and was delighted that it had finally arrived. I had read many articles online saying that Robocough is the cleanest way to experience DXM, aside from pure powder, of course. I had done a fair bit of research about dosages, onset of action, plateaus, etc., but when I do substances, I generally just like to wing it and take more if I'm not getting the desired effect. 2:30. After deciding in my head how many of the bottles to take, I decide to pour one of the 490 milligram bottles in a glass and down the entire thing. Note, I haven't eaten in about 16 hours, so this is on an empty stomach. Being a little bit nervous that I might have taken too much for my first time, I decide to go lay on the couch and throw on the TV and just chill and wait for the come up. 3 o'clock. I'm starting to feel a slight drunken feeling, kind of like I just slammed some alcohol, but noticeably different. I giggle and make my way to the bathroom to urinate, noticing my coordination is a tad off, but am content and a bit euphoric. I can tell I'm looking forward to this experience. 3:30. I'm back on the couch and decide to put on the movie Trainspotting, as it's one of my favorite movies to trip out to. I can start to feel a warm sensation and a slight detachment from my surroundings taking over, but it's still very subtle in nature. 3:45. I decide that I'm not getting the desired effect, so I get up. Now this time, when I try to walk, I am noticing that I'm walking very heavily, and my coordination is definitely hard to control. If I were in a public place, I know I definitely would have looked like a zombie. Anyway, I make my way to the kitchen, pour another bottle of the Robocough in a glass, and chug it. I go lay back down on the couch, excited for the already interesting experience to get even better. 4 o'clock. This is when my body is starting to feel incredibly detached and heavy, and now I'm noticing some visual distortion. My head feels like it's not attached to my body, and I can barely concentrate on the movie. I'm just lying on the couch, enjoying the physical feelings and visuals that I'm experiencing. It kind of reminds me of ecstasy in terms of the physical euphoria, and the mental dissociation, of course, is new to me. I look at my ceiling, and I'm starting to see patterns, almost kind of like faces emerging in stucco. When I would look at different areas of the ceiling, there would be what looked like happy and sad faces. Mostly, it looked just like warping and morphing, kind of like the ceiling was breathing and was alive. It was bizarre to say the least. I'm not quite sure at the moment if I like how I'm feeling mentally, but I decide to just chill and close my eyes. 4:45. I decide I cannot concentrate on the movie at all, and I start to walk around my apartment just to see how I'm feeling. I can barely walk more than a few steps without pausing because it feels like the earth is dragging me down. It's a very new feeling, different, but really trippy, and I start to chuckle at how fucked up I'm getting, and I'm really starting to enjoy this trip. In terms of thoughts, my ego is dissolving rapidly. I'm questioning who I am, where I live, what I'm doing in life, and I just generally feel like I've transcended to this place where the only thing that matters is this moment in time and nothing else. My concerns, anxiety, and worry are washing away, and honestly, I feel blissful. I head back into the kitchen and I'm contemplating taking the last two bottles. I think to myself, this trip is really good so far, and since it's my first time tripping on this, I want to make it count because I probably won't be able to get to this stage again. So, me being a tad reckless, I pour the last two bottles into a glass, chug it, and then make my way back to my couch, which seemed to take forever as my balance was so distorted. 5 o'clock. I can feel the first two bottles definitely having a stronger effect now, and I'm a bit worried that the last two I just took minutes ago is going to make this trip uncomfortably intense. But I just chill, close my eyes, and enjoy the euphoric physical and mental feelings I'm having. I'm meditating in a sense, more questions about reality and my position in life, and of course the underlying anxiety that this is going to get way too intense. But now I cannot concentrate on the movie at all, and it's just background noise to me, so I'm not just silent and alone with my thoughts. By now, I can start to feel what I set out to want in the beginning, complete dissociation and my ego dissolved to its bare core. It's hard to remember what kind of thoughts were going through my head, as it seemed like everything I tried to think of would disappear immediately. But at the same time, it felt like I was learning more about myself. I decide to walk around my apartment again to gauge my coordination. By now, my legs feel like jelly and I almost fall over, but luckily, I make it to my bedroom and collapse on my bed. I'm relieved, but also a bit upset that I took too much DXM for my first time, as I would have liked to go outside and take a walk. I live near a forested area and love tripping out while in the woods, or something instead of being housebound. But still, I'm very much enjoying how I'm feeling. 6 o'clock. Still mostly the same feelings as before. Body dissociation, visual perceptive changes, which by now have taken the form of what I describe are geometric lines covering the walls. It almost reminds me of spiders or something, which kind of freaked me out, but I'm very good at reminding myself that I've taken drugs and that what I'm seeing isn't reality. It still looked just like more warping and morphing along the walls, but still is very distracting, and I can only focus on one section of the wall at a time. 7 o'clock. By now I'm starting to feel very tired, in a good way though, not like the whole I'm too fucked up, I need to sleep way. I feel incredibly content and euphoric, and I'm so thankful that this trip went relatively smoothly. I finally fall asleep with nothing but pure bliss surrounding my mind. 11 a.m. the next day. I wake up feeling in one of the most refreshing ways I've ever felt. I feel like I've just experienced one of the most beautiful experiences in my life, and it truly was. I'm happy. I feel good. I feel social. I am so content. Even I'm surprised, as I really never feel this way. Thinking about the trip, one of the first things that comes into my mind is I want to do it again, but not in the way of like dosing a stimulant or an opiate, but in a way of wanting to find out more about myself internally, what makes my mind tick, etc. Conclusion. By far, one of the best experiences I've ever had. Words don't really do it justice how good it felt during the experience and during the afterglow the next day. But caution to all those interested in tripping. If you are susceptible to any kind of psychotic symptoms, you might have a really bad time, because with DXM, you're going to feel incredibly detached from your own body, and it's going to feel very foreign, especially if you aren't used to dissociatives. I will definitely be doing DXM again in the future. Also, Robocough really is probably the best way to trip on DXM. No nausea at all, literally zero, which was a godsend because I've heard horror stories from others who gulp down a bunch of pills and then are glued to the toilet for their entire trip. Anyways, stay safe. Until next time, peace. Over-the-counter binge or suicide attempt. I am writing to relate an experience we had with our son. This is hopefully a cautionary tale for some of you out there who may get the same ideas, and it may also provide a little insight into what the families of substance abusers go through. I'm not going to get preachy though, so don't worry. I will just stick to the facts. I am a registered nurse who works at a local hospital. My job takes me all over the hospital, so I get to know the staff of all the units rather well. Our middle son started drinking and huffing around age 11, per his recollection. He has said that he never used hard drugs like coke, heroin, crack, etc. He has pretty much stuck to over-the-counter drugs like Coricidin, Robotripping, Robitussin, huffing anything he could get his hands on, including ether. We keep a can handy to start the tractor on cold mornings. Of course, alcohol is his favorite, and he did a lot of mixing booze with the drugs. This led to criminal activity, petty stuff like breaking into neighbors' houses to steal their booze. He broke into his school when he was high and did some damage. Long story short, he's been in and out of juvenile detention, rehab, jail. We've been on this roller coaster with him, and it has broken and rebroken our hearts. I wish I'd known more. I wonder, over and over and over again, what more we could have done to help him. A younger friend of mine directed me here to Irwood, and thus began my education. The incident I wish to relate to you happened while my son was in a work release program. He had been going to the library, researching drugs. As it turns out, he was actually looking up ways that he could get high and still clear urine specimens to his probation officer. Coricidin was it. Now the incident in question has been disputed as to whether it was a true overdose or a suicide attempt. He has changed his story on that one. I was at work and got a call from the ER doc asking me if my son had a seizure disorder. Apparently, he was standing outside the library and was observed to have fallen and begun seizing. A bystander called 911 and was brought to my hospital. I rushed downstairs just as they were wheeling him into CAT scan due to him having hit his head on the sidewalk. I told the doc to do a tox screen, but it revealed nothing. The doc asked if he had ever done cocaine, and I said not to my knowledge, but he can never afford that. It must be something over the counter. His pulse and blood pressure were through the roof, which is why a stimulant was suspected. All they could do was throw fluids into him and keep him monitored and repeat labs. He was in the ICU for a full 48 hours. He had hallucinations whereby he'd be reaching out to grab something in the air in front of his face. He would be tripping like that and then look over at me and start crying and saying how sorry he was, and then he kept saying, "I can't believe I wanted to die. Mom, I took 80 pills." Because of these statements, I did 302 him to the behavioral health, but he was not observed there and managed to slit his wrist and was put back into the ICU. He was despondent for weeks after that. The psychiatrist said he cannot give us a diagnosis, therefore the medication was a hit or miss, the usual antidepressant, anti-anxiety, ADHD med. He said that because our son had been using since the age 11, the substance abuse disorder clouded whatever psychological diagnosis could be made. Altering the brain chemistry during such an important developmental period, blah blah blah, couldn't determine the actual specific disorder, blah blah blah. He simply told my husband and I to keep our marriage strong so our son had that stable family base and to attend Al Anon meetings, which we did and got some good insights from, but have not continued. Our son blew yet another chance and is now in jail again, serving 4 years this time for breaking into a house while high. He'd walked away from his program and encountering the homeowners who had a loaded gun to his head when they realized he was just a kid who was high as a kite. He did not steal a thing. He was rowing a pretend boat in their kitchen, thinking he was a pirate seeking treasure. They had every right to shoot him and did not, despite being scared out of their minds. This was Coricidin and booze. Again, I am sorry I cannot give you specific info as to how many is too many because it surely depends on body size and weight. But that is what is so problematic about this drug. Too much, seizure, coma, and death seems to be about the order of things. You do have out-of-body experiences with this drug as well. I hope this is useful info to somebody out there. All I know is after this experience, even our docs hadn't heard about this drug being abused, and they were now that much wiser. Thanks for listening. The night the air crystallized. I had been having a long day at work. At this time, I worked for a grocery store, and life overall had gotten kinda dull. I decided during a shift to buy a bottle of 1500 milliliter DXM. I would be off late that night, and the landlord wasn't home, so I knew that meant I could get pretty messed up and enjoy my trip. I got off work around 11, took a cab home, and said goodnight to a few people once I got there so I can be alone. I stole a few shots of whiskey from my landlord's liquor cabinet. I know, dick move, but he treated me and other tenants really badly and managed to hide a glass of whiskey as I went upstairs. While browsing Erowid and listening to music on my desktop, I took roughly 2 shots of DXM. It tasted minty and burned my throat, but not in a necessarily unpleasant way. I then proceeded to continue browsing for half an hour, getting into a comfy vibe as my room heated up, and I grabbed my snacks. I then went downstairs to sit outside and smoked a few bowls of some green crack until I got too cold and hacked up a lung. I took another long pull, and that's when I felt as if my body had entered a sort of third-person view. The DXM felt like it was kicking in hard, which is why I had taken a low dose. I knew my antidepressants would make the drug more intense. I watched myself from far away, like looking through a camera, smoked the rest of the bowl, and then snapped out of it, but noticeably felt fuzzy going upstairs. I then got into my chair and shook the glass of whiskey, drinking it in a few gulps. As I went to bed, the DXM and weed were destroying me. I felt as if my body was slowly levitating off the ground, as if I was weightless. If I got any higher, I'd float into a black hole. This scenario got into my head somehow, and I got a bit weirded out. So I started pumping out Jaime Ferrero's I, Asia, which is a really trippy album, and laid on my bed. The music was overpowering as I laid down and got comfortable. The room began to drench in the delayed sounds of the music, its lo-fi quality noise soaking the room. I instantly relaxed, sinking into bed as my mind began to hallucinate. I was in complete darkness for a moment, and then in my imagination, I was on a slide. I could physically feel its cheap, yellow plastic underneath me, and then without control, I was sliding at high speeds. The room was spinning. As I continued down this slide, sparks of blue light occasionally shot into my vision. I would occasionally realize that this was due to me squinting at a light, but was too high to care. This dreamlike experience didn't scare me, but I set alarms on my phone. I wanted to enjoy this trip and document my experience with various songs and what I hallucinated through closed eyes. Xtil Apex Twin, around 1 hour 30 minutes since full ingestion. In my head, I could see myself in a nice club. The walls are a deep blue, and I'm trapped inside a dancing crowd. While normally this would make me anxious, I'm conscious enough to know this isn't real. I try my best to explore this area, but I find I can't really navigate it. More like it is a landscape I can only view by turning in 360 degrees. I can see dancers, deep smiles, and drinks being handed out. I think about how much I want more whiskey, but stop the thought. I start to doze off as the track ends, but wake myself back up. Maggot Brain, Funkadelic. 1 hour, 45 minutes in. In my head, I view the sailing guitar solo of this song as one extended bolt of lightning. Each stroke of Eddie Hazel's guitar pick connecting a beautiful and thunderous, powerful sky. This track was reportedly recorded after Funkadelic guitarist Eddie Hazel took LSD and was told by friends to play guitar as if his mother just died. This song almost drove me to tears. My comfort deepened with each second I listened to it. It brought a deep warmth, and I felt a connectedness to those around me. So far back, 5-star men. 1 hour, 55 minutes in. Okay, these guys are weird. They were a band of DXM addicted teens who make noisy sound collage music and instructed other people to trip to it. Check them out, they're nuts. As their music starts, I can see a ninja in my head slicing logs to pieces, while people dance in the background and chat with kabuki faces on them. They worship this ninja as a sort of king, but he seems to ignore them. This trip feels as if I am watching a mini film in my head. I only last the first minute of the song before I doze off again. Waking Up, Snacks, last song, 2 hours, 45 minutes in. I am now tripping a little bit with open eye visuals. I am seeing things breathe and melt, and it's only a little freaky. When I look in the mirror, I see myself slowly melting away as a zombie. I am literally decaying before my own eyes, and it's one of the coolest distortions of this mind I've sought. I realize now it was just because of the low, shitty lighting and that I probably looked exhausted. I went and made a grilled cheese sandwich, occasionally hearing voices either saying my name or asking me what was up. I went to the door once or twice to make sure no one was home and then scurried back upstairs with my food. As I sat eating, I finished up my meal and watched tracers in my field for a bit, then laid down and shut the lights off. I turned on So It Goes by Kurt Vonnegut. As the drums and the piano filled my ears, I heard Vonnegut narrate one of my favorite books. It described a man seeing things in reverse time, and I felt myself watch another year of my life from the past pass by as a piano key was played. In the instance of that sound, I could see and remember that entire year, and then it was gone. It was a fascinating and beautiful experience, and I'm glad I fell asleep to it. Overall, while this combo can be dangerous, it was honestly one of the best trips I've ever had, and while I can't recommend it for safety reasons, I had a great time, and I hope you all enjoyed this report. DXM Nightmare Trip. This was my first tripping experience and undoubtedly my most intense and horrifying. I am positive that nothing I will ever do from this point on will compare. At the time of this story, I was 15, male, weighed about 115 pounds, and had only experimented with weed and alcohol. Set and setting were not ideal. In short, I was suspended for school for punching a kid who had been picking on me. This led to me having anxiety about going back to school and having to face him and his friends who resented me for it. Being naive, I decided I would spend my days off from school tripping, despite my terrible mindset. I ended up obtaining 2 bottles of Robitussin gel caps. I believe in each bottle there were 20 pills containing 15 milligrams of DXM as the only active ingredient. This equates to 600 milligrams of DXM. My mom was leaving for work while I was home free from school and bored out of my wits. Luckily, or so I thought at the time, I had snagged some entertainment in preparation for a lazy day. I'd always wanted to trip, though I can never get a hold of any psychedelics. Robitussin seemed to be my best bet. I began taking the pills 3 or 4 at a time, spanning from 5 to 10 minutes. After consuming one of the bottles, I was feeling very little effects. I had a slight energy rush and body buzz. It was a very slight feeling of pins and needles and vibrations. Not too pleasant, but not all that unpleasant either. I decided to just down the second bottle, taking all the pills at once. I wanted to trip after all. Having read that it was bad to trip on an empty stomach, I decided to make some waffles. What I didn't realize is how difficult that would be. As I took the waffles out of the freezer and popped them in the microwave, the pills from the first bottle started to hit me harder. The body buzz became more intense and slightly unpleasant. I felt pins and needles very pronounced all over my body, and my motor skills were beginning to suffer. The task of melting butter, cutting the waffles, and pouring syrup suddenly seemed a daunting task. So instead, I took the waffles out of the microwave and began chowing down, not bothering with a fork or knife. They tasted like paper and were very difficult to chew and swallow. And the act of eating plain waffles with my hands made me feel like a savage. For some reason, this thought made me paranoid. I only managed to get half a waffle down. Needless to say, eating on DXM is not enjoyable. Giving up the thought of eating, I ventured to the bathroom. It had been an hour since I ingested the first pills, and I was already noticing some perceptual changes. All the objects in the bathroom suddenly seemed much smaller. It felt as if I were a giant towering over them. The pins and needles were now very intense and almost unbearable. I went back into the living room and came to the realization that I was in deep trouble. The body buzz was only getting more intense, and my heart began to race a little. Not knowing what to do with myself, I decided to lay down on the couch and try to calm myself down. I felt very trapped and confined. Waves of panic rushed over me as my heart started racing faster and my muscles began to get stiff. The only way to put it is every organ in my body felt like it was dying. I couldn't sit down any longer, and I began pacing around the room. Everything seemed small in size and alien. There was not too much visual distortion or hallucination at this point, other than size being different. It just felt as if I were in a different place, like a different dimension containing the same objects. I was caught in a loop of laying on the couch and feeling the horrific body load, then jolting up and pacing around the room only to lay back down. The room was beginning to feel like my own personal torture chamber that I couldn't escape. Of course, I panicked and called my mom. When she picked up, I realized how difficult it was to talk. I could only get a few words out at a time because my whole body felt like it was vibrating. I said something along the lines of, can talk good, need hospital, can you? She interrupted me saying she was on the way, and boy did she sound furious. This made me feel a little better, but not much. I paced around some more, and at one point, I broke out in pure terror. I started screaming hysterically and saying, "The doctors are coming! The doctors are coming!" It wasn't pretty. I was losing my mind. It seemed like hours and hours before she got there, but was probably only 20 minutes. Telling her what I had taken was very hard to do, considering I could barely talk. Eventually, after much sputtering, I was able to get the message across that I had taken 2 bottles of Robogels. She called a pharmacy or poison control number or something to assess the danger. I found it insane that she had to make sure I was dying. While she did that, I stood there and stared blankly at the TV. It was an MTV reality show. I believe someone on the show was wearing a mascot costume, but it was the most grotesque looking thing I had ever seen. It was like a combination of a bear, cockroach, and alien. A human-sized, disgusting, slimy abomination. The color of it was a darker black than I thought possible. I knew this thing could not actually be on a reality TV show. It didn't even seem like it could be in someone's imagination. The realization was terrifying. She finally got off the phone and told me to go upstairs and change because I was wearing skinny jeans and they would cut my circulation. My body was practically numb at this point, so taking off my pants was nearly impossible, and putting a baggier pair on was just not happening. I struggled for a minute before my mom came in and, embarrassingly enough, she had to pull them up for me. We finally left the house and I was nearing my peak. This was probably about 2 hours since I took the first pills. I had very little control over my bodily movements. I started doing things like running my hands up and down my legs, rocking back and forth, and tilting my head around. It was all I could do as the painful vibrations ran through me and my heart attempted to leap out of my chest. I felt like I was dying, and I probably was. I also experienced something I would call a type of ego death or partial ego death. I knew who I was and understood the fact that I was me, but it just didn't seem real or possible. It was as if I was viewing all my life events and recalling memories from a third-person view. I wasn't sure whether these things actually happened and that I was who I really thought I was. I kept on asking my mom if I really punched that kid in the face. While this was going on, I also got the sensation that my life was being broadcasted somehow and that everyone knew what I had done and were disappointed and thought lesser of me. I kept on lasping in and out of consciousness throughout the car ride. When I would come back, the car would appear to go extremely slow, like 15 miles per hour, and then immediately pick up speed until it felt like we were going 90 miles per hour. This cycle continued the whole way there. When we finally got to the hospital parking lot, I noticed the music from the car radio. It sounded very fast and loud with metallic alien voices. The music itself was not of this universe. It sounded like alien instruments playing notes and chords born in another dimension. It permeated my whole being with incredible intensity, and I have no idea how I hadn't paid as much attention to it before. Walking to the hospital from the car was no easy task. I couldn't feel any part of my body, and my vision was failing. My mom had to halfway carry me as I stumbled my way into the waiting room. I can only imagine how that must have looked from an outside perspective. I don't remember much after that. My vision was almost completely gone. When we went to see the doctor, all I could make out was his outline, and behind him, nothing but white. It seemed like I was in heaven, and he was an angel. My mom told him what happened, and I felt like her voice was coming from inside of me, and when the doctor talked, his voice seemed to surround and envelope me. It was like the conversation between my mom and the doctor was really happening between me and God. I could almost describe it as comforting, but I'm not sure that's the right word. It's like the feeling of peace before you die or experiencing every emotion at once. After that, I blacked out. I woke up once in the hospital bed, still tripping, and there were several nurses at my side. I panicked and tried to sit up, but they held me down. I looked at the clock on the wall, but felt as if it were only there for show, because I thought all time had stopped. I didn't think I was in reality anymore. Upon waking up, I was convinced I was locked in a room in a part of my brain. The feeling can be described as being surrounded by an immense labyrinth and you're smack in the middle of it. I fought with them more, attempting to escape my labyrinth before finally surrendering. I think I slept for a day before waking up the morning after. Oddly enough, I felt very relaxed when I woke up. Could be due to the mini coma. In summary, I can definitely say I will never take DXM again. It was a traumatic experience, and I was lucky to make it out alive and sane. I have since done acid and mushrooms and can say there is absolutely no comparison. DXM is its own thing entirely and should not be taken lightly. Stay safe, kids. Delsum after work. I got done with work and went to a pharmacy to pick up a prescription for my mother. While I was there, I stole a bottle of Delsum. I tried Delsum once before, and it was fun until I broke down in the middle of the night and tried to kill myself. But I'm getting off track. This is what happened. Also, I'm currently tripping while writing this. Around 7 p.m., I talked to my friend who had a lot more experience with Delsum than I did. At first, he told me to drink half the bottle, so I did. About a half hour later, he realized I wasn't talking about DPH, which we have done together in the past, and he told me I should finish the rest of the bottle, so I drank the rest. So nothing interesting happens for the next few hours, and I just play Minecraft. Then I feel it. Everything gets super boring, so I have to stop and try to go to bed. I then realize my sense of time is completely fucked as I think it's 2 a.m. In reality, it is currently 12 a.m. My tongue and lips are numb and there is a pulsing in my leg, so I now have to carefully go down a flight of stairs without falling. 12:10 a.m. I made it down the stairs and holy shit, I keep looking at my phone and it felt like it took a year for it to change from 12 to 12:01. I also think I have the legs of an ostrich. And why am I so itchy? Stupid Delsum. 12:11 a.m. Why is my mouth so small? It feels small. That's probably bad. 12:15 a.m. I can't tell if the crickets are real or not. 12:20 a.m. Am I on drugs? 12:30 a.m. I think I'm coming down. Maybe. There's either a moth in my house or I am tripping balls. The moth got swallowed by a plastic bag, so I think I'm still tripping. I'm going to sleep on a treadmill. Also, music is good. Brain is broken. 1 a.m. I can see shapes when I close my eyes and everything is numb again. My liver has begun to sign to me. 1:01 a.m. I think I might stop doing drugs and start taking better care of my body. Start exercising regularly, eat healthy. Maybe then I will start to feel good. Maybe I will no longer be depressed. Thank you, Delsum. 1:30 a.m. My grandmother looked at my eyes and saw how big they are and told me to stop playing video games. I love my grandmother. She has no idea my eyes are big because I drank a bottle of Delsum. Oh, my heart is beating really fast and the lower half of my body is numb. Am I having a heart attack? 2 a.m. Why is everything so damn loud? I just banged my toe off the wall and it scared me. Oh crap, now my room is spinning. Okay, my heartbeat has slowed down. I'm okay. Lips are still numb though. 2:30. How did I get downstairs?